welcome to Pittsburgh. I'm Tom and Dave. Will there be a general manager, and what are you looking for in that candidate, and what type of time frame do you want?
Thanks for the question, Rob. I think that the way that I'll handle that is, just in meeting with John, Tom, Dave, and Sam, it was very clear that the amount of work that they've done and how thorough they were in the search, it was fairly impressive to me, and they've met with a lot of people. I think that is also, with it being June 1st, it might be a little difficult to gain further permissions to meet with some of those candidates regarding a general manager position. So my intention is that I'll handle that on an interim basis here through to July, and then begin to go through candidates and make the decision that's best for the hockey department. If we do go down that path, I think the type of person we'll be looking for is someone progressive that can really add an element to the organization that perhaps I don't have as a skill set in some regard.
Taylor up front.
For Kyle, do you think the Penguins' window to win a championship is still open, and maybe what areas need to be improved upon to make that happen?
Sure. The way that I looked at this and going through this decision, Taylor, from my end, was that I heard and talking to people who, once it kind of started to circulate that this was a position that we were considering after things wrapped in Toronto, I heard a lot of people that were highly skeptical of the team's ability to contend here. And the way I view it is that if people want to bet against Mike Sullivan, Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, and others, they can go ahead and do so, but I'm going to bet on them and go with them here. So I do think that it's a group capable of contending to win a championship. I do think that we need to build out the depth of the group and supplement the greatness that those people bring each day. I think there are some of those pieces that are already here, but in the next several weeks we'll get to work on more of that at the same time, really having a huge amount of focus on the long term as well.
Tim, here on your right.
Kyle, for you, as far as your conversations with Crosby, you mentioned that twice in your opening comments. What did you need or want to hear from him before accepting this job about what you referenced at the end, the eventual gap between when some of these great players do retire and what the future holds?
Sure, thanks, Tim. What I wanted to be able to have a discussion with Sidney about was where he felt the team was at, but more than anything to be able to sit with him and ensure that he still that winning was the number one thing for him, and it was very evident in talking to him that winning is his major focus every day. And I think that when you have people like that are constructed in such a way that winning and the competitiveness that takes and the desire that takes to execute each day enters into the building, I think that can reduce the gap between the end of those players' careers and the next era of great hockey here, because that lifts the whole group and that lifts the whole standard. So if we can do good work on the long-term building while those players and the coaching staff are still, like Sully can coach forever. I mean, he's a great coach, so there's no real expiration date on Mike. On the players, I think everyone looks at it and says their age is what it is. So how much longer does the group here have? And when I talked to Sidney Crosby, it was very clear that his only intention and desire is to win. And that's what I want to hear, because I think that can have a massive impact on raising the level of the players that come in behind as prospects or younger players that we're able to acquire here in the next stretch. And that character of him, his character, and that of the group can reduce the amount of time that you're alluding to in the gap between what's now and what's next.
So you didn't need to hear from him, I'm going to sign another contract after this one expires. You didn't need that answer.
I didn't ask that, no. And no, so he's got two more years. Yeah, so he's got 2 more years left, and we'll address that when we can. That's not till the next 13 months. So yeah.
Dave up front.
Here, Kyle. Welcome to Pittsburgh.
Thank you.
You have a draft coming up in 4 weeks and free agency a couple days after that. Obviously, you can't be that familiar with Pittsburgh's personnel and organization. Who will you rely on to give you input, on which players should be retained, what you need in free agency, what draft prospects look like, that sort of thing?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. I try, and I think it's the responsibility responsibility in this job, and especially because Pittsburgh was a conference rival in my prior post, I try to stay as up to date both at the NHL level and the AHL level with every team. So I have my feelings on the group that's here. I have my feelings on the free agent class. But when it comes to who I will rely on here, I'll obviously rely heavily on the coaching staffs at both levels, at the NHL and the American League level, for their insights on the group. And then just in going through this process the last few weeks, it's been clear to me that there's a very good group of people here in the background that people speak very highly of. And then as I've begun to see their work in the last few days, I think it'll be very helpful for me in going through and informing that. As it pertains to the draft, I think last week the amateur scouts were here and preparing for that, and it is a draft that I do have a fairly decent knowledge on, and we'll use the next 4 weeks to focus on the draft and free agency to make sure that we're armed with the information that we need to make the best decisions. But in terms of who we'll rely on every facet of the organization that's in place, as well as perhaps elevating some other parts of the organization and the input that they can provide.
Josh, on